Well, so it follows these two young men, and it's sort of a coming-of-age, you can say, broadly speaking, a coming-of-age novel set in Scarborough, and as you yourself have written in the novel, Scarberia, a much maligned suburb of Toronto, and it's also where you grew up. So how would you describe Scarborough of your youth?
Yeah, well, the Scarborough of my youth, I think, is a lot like the Scarborough of today in many respects, in that it was filled with many incredible, ordinary people going about the everyday, but nevertheless being quietly heroic in what they were confronting, the lives that they were living, and the beauty and creativity they were etching out in really difficult circumstances.
Beautiful. And that I get that so much from the novel Brother. It's just the beauty in the everyday, the tragedy in the everyday, and as you said, the quietly heroic lives. There's one passage that I find really witty and that I could relate to as a kid growing up in Etobicoke in the 80s. Okay. So when I was a child, Francis protected me. I was smaller than him, of course, but I was also somehow less of a proper presence. There was my nervous smile, there was my hair, which, unlike his, was fundamentally indecisive, forever caught in that no-man's zone between afro and hockey mullet.
I wonder where that came from.
Now, it
it's
resonated.
Not an autobiographical novel. I just want to clarify.
Let's establish
this is
Matt.
fiction.
But this is you have seen someone go through this. You just don't pull that out of the air.
That is such a beautiful thing for you to say, and I really appreciate that. And I think I'll have to confess there are certain aspects of the novel draw from living in Scarborough, and I think the other project of this novel is to imagine a life that is slightly different from yours.
Sure.
So
yes.
and follow through on that question. What if? What if my life was slightly different? What if a certain encounter had tragic results? What if instead of finding my way, I succumbed to a type of despair? And so I think the novel is both, and this is what I truly appreciate about what you've allowed me to say. The novel is at once something very intimate to me, and also, for me, a necessary act of imagination.
It feels so intimate that I think a lot of people are going to think it's your life. And that's actually a testament to your incredible skill and imagination, right?
Thank you.
The novel is, of course, underpinned by violence, casual violence, by authority, which is actually abusing, its authority, and by one particularly tragic act. It was so deeply harrowing. And yet, I felt like I was bearing witness to something that was really important. And it's not an overtly political novel, but it is also a political novel. I think just by telling the story of these people who have been underrepresented in, contemporary mainstream Canadian literature, that's a political act, giving them a voice, giving them agency, creating what I believe is almost like an opera around something that would be turned into a headline otherwise,
Yeah, how do we see the lives behind the bloody newspaper headlines?
Yeah.
How do we also recognize, and I think this might be important for my novel, that what has become more frequently recognized today, really as a result of a lot of political movements and activism that have bravely put certain really burning questions in the eyes of people who otherwise wouldn't be aware of these issues. I guess at the same time, the questions explored in the novel are old questions, and they have been these circumstances have been happening for decades and centuries. And so it's something when a story set in the past suddenly, for some, seems very newly,
very new and contemporary,
very relevant.
Yeah,
But I think the understanding that long legacy is also what I try to
that's a beautiful way of putting it, right? Because it's not strictly speaking sort of an immigrant story, but it's the children of immigrants and them negotiating Canada. And to me, I'm very much going to go there. We have this conceit in Canada that we are very fair. We are, a very judicious and multicultural society, just society. And on many levels we are, of course, much more in comparison than other parts of the world, but that's not good enough.
Behind a myth that we like to tell ourselves about Canada, there is a reality. And unfortunately, that reality is oftentimes quite violent. And it begins with colonization and stolen Indigenous land.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it goes through. It includes slavery, for instance, and legal segregation. And of course, it includes other questions, all kinds of hierarchies, racial hierarchies that we don't want to acknowledge oftentimes. And so maybe it's especially important, if we have cultivated a myth about our nation, that we rivet our attention upon those very things that we don't want to look at all the time. Yeah.
So important. And that's why this book, all of Canada should read. Sorry, I can't help it.